The ballroom glimmered like a dream woven in gold and glass. Crystal chandeliers hung above, their light bouncing off the marble floors and spilling across gowns worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Music floated softly through the air, a perfect blend of class and arrogance, and Elena moved through it all like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Her hand rested lightly on her husband Gabriel's arm, her diamond bracelet catching every flicker of light. People turned when she passed, whispering her name, admiring her confidence, her beauty, her effortless sense of superiority. She thrived in this world of polished smiles, expensive perfumes, and shallow compliments. Every glance of approval fed her ego. Every nod of recognition made her chin rise just a little higher. Tonight's gala wasn't just another social event. It was her event. Her name was on the invitations, her face in the magazines, her influence behind every sponsor who had written a check. To Elena, this was her proof that she had built a perfect life. Money, power, prestige, and a husband whose success she wore like another jewel. As she made her way to the dessert table, her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step rehearsed. A young woman in a simple black dress hurried past, balancing a tray of glasses. She looked nervous, out of place. A server, Elena assumed. But then, as fate would have it, their paths collided. The tray wobbled, and a drop of champagne splashed across Elena's golden heels. The room seemed to freeze. Elena's breath caught, not in surprise, but in outrage. "Are you blind?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the music. The woman stammered, her eyes wide. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident." Her trembling hands tried to grab a napkin, but Elena stepped back in disgust, eyes narrowing. "An accident? Do you have any idea what these cost?" Laughter tittered nervously among the onlookers, unsure whether to intervene or watch. The woman lowered her gaze, cheeks burning red. But that submission, that quiet apology, only fueled Elena's fury. With a cold smirk, she reached forward, grabbed the hem of the woman's dress, and yanked it sharply. The fabric tore with a sickening rip that echoed louder than the music. Gasps filled the room. The woman froze, clutching the shredded cloth to her side, her face pale with humiliation. "Next time," Elena sneered, her tone dripping venom. "Learn how to serve without ruining the evening." For a moment, no one moved. The band had stopped playing. Glasses paused mid-air. Even the waiters looked horrified. The young woman didn't speak. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. She turned and walked away quickly, her head bowed, clutching the ruined dress as whispers rippled behind her. Elena exhaled sharply, as if shaking off an inconvenience, and turned to Gabriel with a triumphant little smile, expecting him to comfort her, to admire her control. But he didn't smile back. His gaze was fixed on the door where the young woman had just disappeared, his expression unreadable, his silence heavy and cold. For the first time that night, Elena felt a flicker of unease in her perfect world. Outside, the night air was cold and still, heavy with the kind of silence that follows humiliation. Valeria stumbled out of the ballroom, clutching the torn edge of her dress with trembling fingers. Her eyes burned from holding back tears, her chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. The laughter and music behind her were muffled now, like a cruel reminder of the world that had just spat her out. She made her way across the parking lot, her heels scraping the pavement, until she reached a small, beat-up car parked in the shadows. There, finally hidden from the eyes of the wealthy and heartless, she broke. Her body shook as she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, sobbing quietly, not just from the humiliation, but from the heartbreak of seeing her hard work destroyed in front of everyone. A voice broke through the silence, soft but steady. "Miss," she turned around, startled. Standing a few feet away was Gabriel. Tall, composed, his tuxedo jacket slung over one arm, the moonlight tracing the lines of concern on his face. "Please," he said gently, raising a hand. "I'm not here to make it worse." Valeria wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself, but her voice still trembled. You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Go back inside before she notices." Gabriel took a step closer. "She already noticed enough," he said, his tone edged with quiet regret. What my wife did in there was unforgivable." His words hung in the air for a moment, heavy and sincere. Valeria swallowed hard, looking down at the shredded fabric in her hands. "You don't have to apologize for her," she said softly. "She doesn't know who I am." Something in her tone made Gabriel pause. He looked at her carefully. Really looked. Not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as someone with a story. "Then who are you?" he asked. Valeria hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope with the logo of G. Vallon Couture embossed on it, a name Gabriel recognized instantly. Inside were signed documents, sketches, and an official contract. "My name is Valeria Cruz," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm the designer you hired for your wife's charity gala. That dress she tore apart was the prototype for the entire collection." Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. He took the documents, scanning the familiar letterhead, his jaw tightening as realization hit. He looked back at Valeria, who stood there in the cold night air, humiliated, holding the proof of her talent, the talent his wife had just mocked and destroyed. "I worked for months on this project," Valeria continued, her voice breaking again. "Every stitch, every detail was meant for tonight. And now it's all gone." Gabriel's chest tightened with guilt. He had seen his wife's arrogance before, but tonight it had crossed a line he could no longer ignore. "You deserved admiration, not cruelty," he said quietly. "I'm truly sorry, Valeria." She shook her head, her lips quivering. "Apologies don't fix what's ruined." Gabriel looked at her then, really looked, and saw more than a victim. He saw resilience beneath the tears, a quiet strength that his wife, for all her wealth, would never understand. "No," he said firmly, his voice low and resolute, "but I can make sure it's not the end of your story." Valeria looked up, confused, as he slipped his jacket off and draped it gently over her shoulders. The warmth startled her. Not just the physical comfort, but the compassion behind it. Gabriel gave her one last look, one filled with a promise she couldn't yet name, before turning back toward the glowing ballroom where his wife's laughter still echoed, unaware that her empire of arrogance had just begun to crack. Elena found Gabriel waiting in the car, his hands resting motionless on the steering wheel. The lights from the mansion spilled through the windshield, flickering over his face, calm but cold, as if carved from stone. She slipped into the seat beside him, her perfume filling the air, her tone impatient. "Where have you been? Everyone was asking for you. You just left me there," she said, brushing invisible dust from her gown. Gabriel didn't answer. He simply turned his head and looked at her, his eyes unreadable. In his hand he held something, a piece of torn fabric, pale silk, frayed at the edges. He placed it gently in her lap. "You remember this?" he asked softly. Elena glanced down, frowning. "What? Oh, that ridiculous waitress's dress? What about it?" Gabriel's voice came quiet, deliberate, heavy with meaning. "That ridiculous dress," he said, "was the prototype from the designer I personally commissioned for your charity gala. The same woman you humiliated in front of everyone tonight." Elena's breath caught. "What?" she whispered, color draining from her face. "No, you must be mistaken. She was serving drinks." "She was waiting for you," Gabriel cut in sharply, his tone suddenly sharper than she had ever heard it. "She came to present her work, your collection. And instead of welcoming her, you tore it apart." For the first time that night, Elena's confidence faltered. The chill in his voice made her stomach twist. I didn't know, Gabriel. You didn't tell me." "That's exactly the point," he said, his voice rising just enough to make her flinch. "You never know. You never ask. You walk through life assuming everyone is beneath you, as if kindness is some kind of weakness." Elena turned toward him, her eyes wide and glistening. "Gabriel, please, it was a mistake. I'll apologize, I'll fix it." He looked at her with a sadness deeper than anger. Some things can't be fixed with an apology. Silence settled between them. The hum of distant traffic, the faint thump of music from the ballroom. Everything felt distant, almost unreal. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the torn fabric in her lap, realizing that it was more than silk. It was her reflection, her arrogance shredded for the world to see. Later that night, The mansion was quiet. Elena stood by the enormous window of her bedroom, staring out at the city lights. She had changed out of her gown, but the feeling of shame clung to her like a second skin. Behind her, Gabriel sat at his desk, speaking softly on the phone. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught fragments. Investment. New collection. Valeria Cruz. When he hung up, he didn't look at her. "I told her I'd sponsor her line," he said simply. "What you destroyed tonight deserves to live." Elena turned toward him, her voice breaking. "And what about us, Gabriel?" He looked up then, his gaze calm but distant, the warmth that once lived there now gone. "That depends," he said quietly, "on whether you still know the difference between pride and cruelty." He stood, took his jacket, and walked out, leaving her in the echo of her own silence. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the glass. The woman who once believed she had everything, now realizing that she'd lost the one thing money could never buy, the respect of the man who once saw beauty in her heart.